Vamos a dar paso a nuestra segunda ponente, la doctora KATHLEEN CRANDELL. La doctora Crandell está adscrita al Kentucky Equine Research de Estados Unidos y en su formación ella es máster en nutrición equina y fisiología del ejercicio. Tiene también un doctorado en nutrición y reproducción equina, ambos en el Instituto Politécnico de Virginia. La doctora es miembro del staff del Kentucky Equine Research, el KER, durante 20 años y es responsable del soporte especializado a nivel nacional e internacional para los socios del KER en la formulación de dietas y da soporte a la producción de empaques para alimentos en caballos. Ella es instructora también en la Universidad de Guelph, en Ontario, Canadá, y es asesora profesional en programas individuales de nutrición en caballos deportivos. La doctora tiene gran experiencia en conferencias en eventos internacionales, es conferencista a nivel internacional y en su actividad privada participa en competencias de enduro con sus caballos árabes. Sus investigaciones versan sobre los temas principalmente de nutrición equina y tiene numerosas publicaciones a lo largo de su actividad profesional. Entonces, pues, doctora KATHLEEN, bienvenida, es un placer tenerla y estamos en espera de su interesante charla.
Well, buenos dias. I want to thank the organizers of this conference once again for inviting me to speak. I feel very privileged to be among such highly respected professionals. Also, I would like to thank Dr. Hernandez-Hugh for explaining in excellent detail the concepts that are so important in the endurance horse, particularly hydration. And because hydration is probably the most important aspect for the success of the endurance horse. So thank you once again, Dr. Q. So endurance is one of the fastest growing equine sports in the world. Well, at least that was until COVID hit. And so I thought maybe I would start to this talk with explaining a little bit about what is endurance riding. So I call endurance riding extreme trail riding because instead of doing a 5-kilometer little cabalgata or trail ride, these guys are going 30 and 60 and 160 kilometers. So yes, it's quite intense. And it's done by horses and a rider. The horse, that would be the same horse and the same rider that follows a marked trail for the distance that's designated. The competitions are anywhere from 80 to 120 to 160 kilometers. And these are all in one day, completed in one day. And they also have multi-day rides, which are my particular favorite. And these usually are somewhere between 40 and 80 kilometers a day, and they can last from 2 to 5 days. There's one in the west of the United States that's 5 days, 80 kilometers a day. So the idea behind endurance riding is that when the horse finishes, that he is still sound enough and fit enough to continue. And so that's where the motto of the endurance rider comes from, is to finish is to win. In a competition, again, it's the first over the finish that wins, and then usually the top 10 finishers will be recognized. These are endurance rides in the United States. In other countries, they may, like in Australia, they will recognize the top 10 finishers or the top finishers of the different weight divisions within the competition. And that's the weight of the rider and the tack and everything on top of the horse. So during an endurance competition, horses will be controlled. They will be vetted by a veterinarian or a team of veterinarians before they start the ride, at various periods during the ride, and then again after the ride. In order to pass and be allowed to start or continue at every stop, they meet a pulse criteria, which means that their pulse has to be down to like somewhere, it'll be set by the ride, but somewhere between 60 and 68 beats per minute. And within a certain time period of entering into that stop during the ride. And there can be quite a number of a variety of number of stops within a ride, depending on the distance. So for a 160-kilometer ride here in the U.S., they were required to have at least 6 veterinary stops for the horses to be controlled by the veterinarian. And at these stops, the horses will be given time to first be checked by the veterinarian, and then they have time to eat and drink and just rest for a little bit. The horses are eliminated from the competition, or as we would call pulled, but they are eliminated usually for reasons of lameness, metabolic, and most of the time I'll have to say it's probably due to dehydration. Oh, the two. Well, here in the United States, we have the sanctioning body would be the American Endurance Ride Conference, the AERC, and in Australia they have another different conference. But then the rest of the world usually follows the sanctioning or gets sanctioning from the FEI, the Fédération Équestre Internationale. The veterinary criteria that they're looking at when they're checking these horses is their resting heart rate, their respiration, and the quality of the mucous membranes, and then they check for a capillary refill to see how fast the capillaries refill after pressure, a light pressure. They check for hydration. One way is the skin tenting on the neck to see how well the skin rebounds. They listen for the sounds of the digestive tract, so the gut sounds, and they check the anal tone, and they check muscle tone, and then they will ask the horse to trot out and back. Normally it's in a straight line. Maybe before the ride when they're checking the horse, they may ask the horse to circle in both directions. They are looking, and here when they're trotting out, they're looking for this overall soundness of the horse and the attitude of the horse. I mean, that's important to check to see if they're depressed. That might be an indication that something's going wrong. And then sometimes they'll do a cardiac recovery index, which is checking the heart rate, trotting, and then so many seconds later, checking the heart rate again. So some of the rules of the road, so to speak, in general for endurance ride is they tend to be a group start depending on the size of the group. In something like the biggest ride here in the U.S., the Tevis, they may divide it into 2 sections for the start. But normally it's a group start, and the trail is open. The horse and rider can actually cross the start line at any time after the start is open. They don't have to go out with the group if they don't want to. They are allowed to go at their own pace all throughout the ride, but there are certain rules for the cutoff times for when they can get to the different veterinary checkpoints. So if they don't get into the checkpoint in time, then they'll be eliminated from the ride. The riders, they can run, they can walk, and they can jog along inside their horses at any time through the ride. So they do not have to be mounted through the whole competition. If they leave the trail, of course, then they just need to get back on the trail where they went off if they don't want to be and if they don't want to be eliminated. In endurance, this is a true strategic test of horsemanship. The rider really has to know what's the best pace for their horse to get through the type of terrain that they're going over, the weather conditions, and then the length of the course. And they have to really know the level of fitness of their horse so they don't push them too hard. They are also, the riders are under the sanctioning body rules for their own conduct, and they're expected to exhibit excellent horsemanship. And as for what it takes to train a horse, it's about a year of training to prepare a horse for a 50-mile competition. A competition that's 80 kilometer, and it might take a couple years to get a horse really truly fit and for a 180 kilometer ride, particularly at an FEI level event. It's open to any breed. It's not breed specific. Horses, ponies, mules, any horse that's at least 5 years of age. And these two horses, this is at the World Championships when it was in Kentucky one year. And this is like a typical weight. And they may look thin to you because of the conformation of the Arabian breed, but this is a typical working weight for a high-level competition horse. The breeds that we commonly see, mostly Arabians and Anglo-Arabs, half Arabians, but also sometimes you see Morgans and Mustangs and gaited horses. The other breeds of horses, the horse that completed the Tevis the most number of times actually was a quarter horse. So it can be any breed as long as they have the willingness and the muscle type to do this kind of exercise. And so what is that muscle type? Well, as you can see in this picture, it's long and lean. It would be your type 1 muscle specific type. These horses have a lot more of type 1 muscle tissue than the type 2 and A and B. And what is the right body condition score for a horse? This is one sport where body condition truly, truly influences the ability of the horse to complete the competition. If you looked at if the horse is carrying too much weight, if it's too fat, he not only is carrying the extra weight down the trail, which will make him burn more energy, but he also will have difficulty cooling because of that layer of subcutaneous fat that will interfere with the cooling of the horse. So on the other end of the spectrum, if the horse doesn't have enough weight, then he won't have enough body stores of fuel to be able to finish the ride. So if you looked at the scale of 1 to 9, the Henneke body condition score, the ideal for the endurance horse is somewhere in the middle. So somewhere between 4 and 5.5 would be ideal. There was an interesting study done 2 years in a row at the Tevis, which was the largest endurance ride in the United States. And they weighed the horses, they weighed and body conditioned the horses before they started the competition, and then looked at the completion rates on those horses that they had this information from. And what they found, well, that the average body condition score for horses starting the Tevis was 4.5. But I think probably the most telling of the result of the research was that none of the horses with the body condition score less than 3 was able to complete the ride. So keeping a horse in its ideal body condition will increase the horse's chance of success. So how does the horse finish 180 kilometers in less than 24 hours? Well, 160 kilometers. They will be mostly trotting, cantering, maybe some galloping. It might be walking, particularly when they're climbing or coming down steep hills. It's interesting. Most of the rides, most of the horses can finish within that 24-hour period. Some of the really hilly competitions, they may be finishing in 15 to 18 hours. But so in Dubai, when they're running across the desert, and they're doing this mostly at a gallop, the record for the fastest was less than 8 hours, 100 miles. Now, that doesn't include, this 24 hours includes the time the horses have to stop and rest, and that 8 hours doesn't include the hold times. So why doesn't a horse overheat with that amount of extended exercise? Well, they can dissipate heat through perspiration. And as you can imagine, the sweat losses are quite significant in an endurance horse. And this is also weather dependent. So if the weather is really cold, they may not be sweating as much. If the weather is hot, they will be sweating more. And if the weather is hot and humid, that's when they sweat the most. So the other method of them losing of cooling, keeping from overheating, is convection. And this is what happens when they're trotting and cantering. The air moves across their skin and it cools the horse. And you can see that when these horses, they slow down and go to a walk, that all of a sudden all this sweat just pours out of them. So they're not getting that convection to help them cool. So then you're almost better trotting them again than giving them a breather to walk. The other thing that's used very, very much with the endurance horse is cooling with water. And this pulls the heat away from the body. And so you'll see endurance riders with sponges on their tied to their saddles, or some type of container, so that when they cross a creek, or when the organizers have put out some water tanks along the trail, that they can bring the horse up to the tanks without getting off the horse and dump water on the horse to help pull that heat away from the body. You'll also see when they come into the rest stops that the first thing that that the crew that helps the horse is doing is putting water on the horse to try to bring the heart rate down. So what is fueling this tremendous effort, this prolonged effort? So they're getting energy from glucose, not just the circulating glucose, but also the breakdown of glycogen in the muscle cell. They're getting energy from the short chain fatty acids, the ones that are in the muscle cells or in the liver. And the short chain fatty acids may be converted to glucose in the liver, but in the muscle cells for sure. And then triglycerides. So I don't know if my cursor is showing up, but like the glucose would follow through into the muscle cell. And then the idea is to produce ATP, which will result in muscle contraction. So it can be glucose, and it can be the short chain fatty acids, or fat itself to produce triglycerides. Fatigue in the endurance horse actually happens from both glycogen depletion but maybe even more so from dehydration. So if you're looking at the amount of stores of energy within the horse, you can see here for a 450 kilogram horse, there's about 2,200 grams of triglyceride stored in the muscle, but there's about 40,000 grams of adipose triglyceride in the adipose tissue. Now, this comes back to that body condition score, and the lower the body condition score, the less of this there's going to be. And there's about 3,500 grams of muscle glycogen and 15 grams of liver glycogen. So you can see here the adipose triglyceride would be the biggest store that they could pull from to produce energy while they're moving down the trail. So the type of work that these horses are doing is mostly aerobic. So if you think these are walk, trot, canter, mostly aerobic. There's some anaerobic. They are the sprints and the long gallops. So if you looked at the percentage of the energy being produced in the time, you can see that here the anaerobic, pretty soon they're not going to be using this as a method of energy production very long into the type of work that they are doing, and they are going to be using mostly aerobic. So what's the right fuel for the endurance horse? So anaerobic uses glucose and glycogen to produce that type of energy, anaerobic. And then anaerobic uses fatty acids. So where does the glucose and glycogen come from? It comes from starch and sugar in the diet. And then where do the fatty acids come from? It comes from fat and fiber. So you can see that maybe you would want to focus more on fat and fiber in the diet and not quite so much in starch and sugar in the diet of the endurance horse. But just keep in mind that fat burns in a flame of carbohydrate, that in order for the body to utilize fat, the fatty acids in the diet, they need to have some carbohydrate, some starch or sugar. So where do you find these energy sources in the diet? Well, fiber energy is coming from the forage mostly, and then also the other super fibers, we call them, so beet pulp and high fiber concentrates. And the starch and sugar in the diet is mostly coming from the grain, if you're feeding straight grains like oats, barley, or grains that are used in the concentrate feed. And then the sugar would be from the molasses on the feed. Fats are mostly coming from additional fat added to the diet in the form of oil, or maybe something like rice bran. And then concentrate feeds can have added fat. So varying the proportions of the different energy sources will produce better results for meeting the energy needs of the different speeds that the horse is using during a race. So keeping that, if we're going to have a lot we want a lot of fiber in the diet, a lot of forage, then you've got to keep that digestive tract healthy so that it can adequately digest the forage. And what's key to the digestion of forage? That microbial population. They are needed for fuel production and success. So just a little bit about that the microbiome, because it is so vitally important. And I thought, again, Dr. Hernandez-Gil, he did a good job of explaining this. But so in the digestive tract, it's populated with the microbiota, the bacteria and fungi and protozoa and archaea, all the way through the digestive tract, but they're highly concentrated in the cecum and colon. And in this part of the digestive tract, they are producing the majority of the energy for the horse in the form of short chain fatty acids. The one thing that I think is very interesting and that we sort of forget about is that this energy production, it doesn't really stop when the horse starts exercising. So if you think about it, those are microbes and they're just doing their job within that digestive tract. And so the short chain fatty acids are a byproduct of their metabolism. So they can keep producing these short chain fatty acids. So this is why it's so important to keep forage fiber in the gut of the endurance horse so that they can get some energy from these the microbes. And this will help to spare glycogen. But other responsibilities of the microbiota is that the butyrate producing bacteria maintain the health of the gut lining. And then as we're learning more and more about the microbiome, we know now that about 70% of the immune system is actually in the gut. And then this gut actually communicates with the brain via the nervous system. And this is called the gut-brain axis. And the problems, an imbalance in the microbiota microbiome can be caused by a number of things: diet, stress, illness. And the extreme of an imbalance would be if maybe the horse was given too many rapidly fermentable types of feed in the diet. And so there's like too much starch in the diet, or maybe intake of too much really high sugar grass. And so then these fibers would be digested by the lactic acid producing bacteria, which would lower their byproduct would be lactic acid. So this would lower the pH of the hindgut. And then when the pH drops, it makes it inhospitable for the normal fiber digesting bacteria. And so you can get a die-off. Now, on a small scale, it might just be poor fiber digestion, but it also can cause chronic colic and then causes other signs of discomfort in the gut. And ultimately, I guess it would lead to laminitis, but just on a smaller scale, it can affect the horse by giving him loose stools and stereotypic behaviors. So the key to success is keeping that microbial balance in mind. So I hope that brings home that forage probably is the most important ingredient in the diet of the endurance horse. It's a major source of energy. It also provides other essential nutrients, proteins and vitamins and minerals. It can keep bulk in the digestive tract so that it functions properly, keeps food moving through. It helps with blood flow to the tract, and that's even during exercise. Having fiber in the gut stimulates thirst. And it all acts as a reservoir for water and electrolytes. And then it also reduces the risk of abnormal behaviors and gastric ulcerations. So in the endurance horse, we like to see their diet to be more than 75% forage. So here in the United States, most of the endurance horses are out on pasture 24 hours a day and then 365 days a year. So it is probably the healthiest way to maintain this type of horse. It gives them free choice access to nibble all day long. And these digestive tracts were developed to be trickle fed and not meal fed. So it also reduces the risk of things like colic and ulcers. And also importantly, being out on pasture, it allows these horses to move freely. And so it helps to keep the joints lubricated and then the muscles loose. So these horses, like if they're out 24/7, they are a lot less likely to to suffer from episodes of tying up and muscle cramping. The other thing about being out on grazing on pasture is they are eating in a head down position, and this helps with the proper functioning of the jaw and the chewing apparatus. It's also foraging, and with the head down position is very soothing to the horse, so it's therapeutic and de-stressing. And I understand that not all horses are lucky enough to have access to pasture, but if there's some possibility of some kind of turnout, even if it is, if it doesn't have grass, but it's turnout with hay and one, but with a lot more room than being maintained in the stall, it's much better for the endurance horse for sure. So how much was the forage requirement? I think with the endurance horse, a minimum of 1.5% of their body weight. So if it was a 400 kilogram horse, that would be a minimum of 4 kilograms of forage a day. Typically, if they're out on pasture, they're going to fulfill their requirement without you having to worry about or weigh anything out. And this, of course, that is, of course, if they don't have any problems with their teeth or parasites. So if we were looking at the type of concentrate feed for an endurance horse, there are a whole spectrum of different types of feeds now available on the market. So the traditional feed, and then there's on one end of the spectrum, and then on the other end you have your high fiber and high fat feeds. These usually they incorporate some type of super fiber like beet pulp or soy hulls, coconut meal, something like that, to increase the amount of fiber and decrease the amount of starch. With a traditional feed, you can see if you looked at the energy, the distribution of energy sources within the feed, that over 50% of the energy source in a traditional feed would be from starch, while as in one of these new higher fiber feeds or high fiber fat feeds, the majority of the energy source would be coming from fiber. And this being an example of a higher fat feed, fiber fat feed, also there's a lot more energy coming from fat. So kind of summarizing a little bit about feeding the endurance horse. If they can be out 24 hours on pasture, that's great. If not, hay, but ideally grass hay. Now, this is talking about on a daily basis, like when the horse is in training. This is not at the competition. I will get into feeding at a competition in a minute. So grass hay, they can have some alfalfa, but you don't want to base the diet on alfalfa. Alfalfa is high in calcium, and that can mess with the horse, the calcium regulation during a competition. So you're just going to try to base it on something a little bit lower in calcium, like grass hay. You can add super fibers like beet pulp, soy hulls, coconut meal. The idea is to maintain that healthy microbiome. And again, a minimum of 1.5% of the body weight. And it's best if you can just offer it ad lib, so they can eat as much as they want. For the concentrate, you want it to have a balance of energy, protein, vitamins, and minerals. Again, you're probably better off with one of those higher fiber feeds or higher fiber and fat feeds. And yet, some of these endurance horses, particularly the purebred Arabians, can be pretty easy keepers if they're not working too hard, if they're not competing too often. And so many of them are maintained on something like a ration balancer. And the ration balancer is a type of concentrate feed that has a low intake, and it's more concentrated in protein, vitamin, and minerals. So they can get the protein, vitamin, and mineral without the extra calories. And then you want to add some kind of dietary fat, so oil seeds like linseed or sunflower seeds or other high-fat seeds, rice bran, The nice thing about fat is it provides the calories, but it also, they call it cool calories or calm calories because it doesn't make the horse more excitable like a high starch type of feed would do. And then the other things to consider is electrolytes. They may not need electrolytes on a daily basis. You certainly will want to work on loading electrolytes before they get loaded into the trailer, or preloading before they go into a trailer to go to a competition. And you're going to probably want to electrolyte them the whole time they're at a competition. But some people don't mind. They like to electrolyte them daily on a regular basis, or at least provide them with salt. And vitamin E, they definitely have a higher need for vitamin E because of the massive amount of oxidation that goes on with that kind of exercise. And then maybe consider probiotics. So the amount of starch and sugar and fat and fiber in the diet will depend on a little bit on the preference of the owner or the individual himself. Like some horses may need a higher starch diet in order to maintain weight. Some horses may need more fiber. Some horses might need less of everything just because they easily maintain weight. And it also will be dictated by the speed that the horses are being trained at and competed. So if they're being competed at higher speeds, they probably are going to need a little more starch and fat in the diet than a horse that is not being competed at the higher speeds. Also, the tractability and the excitability of the horse. If they are a really nervous horse, you're going to want to be probably feeding him a high fat and fiber diet and avoiding as much starch as possible. And if the horse needs more calories, of course, you're going to do whatever you can to get those calories in. And if it's starch, it's starch. If it's fat, it's fat. Whatever it takes. Horses may have metabolic issues. Maybe they have a problem with tying up. Maybe with you're going to want to start. You want to avoid starch if the horse has something like polysaccharide storage myopathy. There's also just the traditions and veterinary recommendations within a country will influence what they're being fed. So now I'd like to just go into feeding management at a competition. Again, hydration is absolutely key. If that horse doesn't start his ride, his competition, fully hydrated, your chances of success are greatly diminished. So some of the strategies for maintaining hydration in the endurance horse, well, fresh grass, of course, green grass is about 70 to 80% water. So there's a whole bunch of water that they can get in without you even working on it right there. But once you're in the trailer and loaded up to go, grass may be a little bit of a challenge to give them. But except once you get to the ride, there may be a chance to graze the horse. So that's actually ideal if you can get some grass into them at the ride. Again, hydration is a key. So you want to make sure they're drinking. And if they just go off water because they don't like traveling, or they go off water because they're upset about where they are, you're going to do whatever you can to make them want to drink more water. So sometimes you can add flavoring like molasses or maybe apple juice or something. And when you do add flavoring, you should always keep an extra bucket of unflavored water also available. The thing about the flavoring the water is that you really need to accustom the horse at home to drinking flavored water first, because it may be something that they really would drink if they were used to it, but won't because it's new and in their in a little bit of a stressful situation. You can give them electrolytes or salt, and of course you'll see that once you give electrolytes, that usually makes them thirsty and will make them drink. And feeding hay also, it seems that if you feed hay, the horse is going to drink within 2 hours after eating that hay. So that's another way to encourage them to drink. And then you can also put water on their feed and on their hay. You can soak the hay or just douse the hay so they're getting a little bit of water with the hay. You can make their feeds very, very wet, sloppy mashes. Again, with these mashes, it's not something you want to start to try at an endurance ride. You're going to want to be doing this ahead of time so they're accustomed to eating wet feed, because some horses really don't like mashes. So at a competition, you want them to be like relaxed. A lot of these horses arrive 2 days or the day in advance of the competition, and so they need to unwind so that they can be at their best when they start. And so just remember that eating is soothing to the horses. So if you can get them eating, that's a very calming thing. They like schedules. And so if you can keep it to the same times that you feed at home, that helps a little bit for them. But sometimes their appetite is a little picky. And so then you may want to just break it up into small, frequent meals and add in more meals. Like if you normally fed once a day at home or twice a day, you may be wanting to add 3 or 4, make it 3 or 4 meals while you're at the competition. And then keeping a free choice hay available to them all the time, something to chew on, and chewing is relaxing to the horse. So just feeding at the competition, again, if you're just remember that the meals that you feed the day before is the fuel that the horse is going to be using for the competition, is the gas in the tank. So you're going to want to top off those glycogen stores if you can with some type of starch and sugar and concentrate. So maybe their normal diet is just strictly forage and a ration balancer, or forage and a high fat and fiber feed. You might at this point want to make sure they have a little bit of starch in their feed pan before they start the ride. You want to make sure they have plenty of fiber in there, not only for the reservoir of water, but also for the reservoir of energy. Like I said, they can be digesting, or the microbes will digest and produce short-chain fatty acids for them while they're competing. So grass or hay, beet pulp, some type of, you can chaff, or there's chopped hay cubes. There's all kinds of different ways to increase the fiber in the diet. And again, I like to always recommend that if you're going to introduce something new at the ride, you should probably offer it at least in the week or 2 before. And it doesn't have to be a full portion of it, but just a little bit. Like if you're going to have alfalfa cubes at the ride, like maybe start with 1 or 2 alfalfa cubes just to help the microbiome adapt to the different feedstuffs. So again, fiber is so important for the endurance horse. Keeps one of the problems that the veterinarians look for is the lack of gut sound during the competition. And when those guts go quiet, it's a sign that there's going to be a problem. And so keeping fiber in the gut helps the gut sounds and keeps the food moving through the digestive tract. Again, it's that supply of short-chain fatty acids. Having that fiber triggers a thirst response. There was for a little while this sort of theory that maybe you should taper off the amount of forage before a race so that the horse weighs less. And this is killer for an endurance horse. You really should not be tapering off the amount of fiber, because they're really going to need this for all the above reasons during the competition. So when they're actually racing and they're coming into the rest stops and they get a chance to eat, this is where you really want to make sure that they get a chance to fuel up a little bit. Again, like I say, everything should be introduced at least in small amounts before that day. You probably want to offer the same feed that they get at home so that it doesn't cause gastric upset. But so you may want to have introduced them in small amounts during the week before. What happens a lot of the time is the horse gets picky, comes into a stop, doesn't want to eat its own feed, but boy, the feed in the neighbor next to him, that one looks really good. A lot of times, if that's the only thing he's going to eat, let him eat it, because you just need to get the food in him. Ideally, it's not that good because it's going to be a change in the diet, but if that's what it takes, that's what it takes. Usually you want to offer all the feeds that the vet checks wet so that you're sneaking more water into the horse. But again, you have to make sure a horse will eat a wet mash feed before trying to just introduce it to him at a competition. So a lot of times at endurance ride, we will feed alfalfa, some kind of legume hay. And this, like, I know that I said, like, on a daily basis, you don't want to be feeding them this kind of hay, but during a ride, it's quite common to offer this because that extra calcium in there will help buffer the stomach acids. Also that extra calcium helps with the muscle contractions. The palatability is very good. It will help them. It'll perk up their appetite. It may be something they'll eat, and they may not want grass hay. It's usually higher in energy, and I just like to introduce small amounts into the diet before leading up to a competition. And so this can be done with pelleted alfalfa or cubed alfalfa cubes. They work just as well as offering alfalfa hay. So what types of feed during the race? Well, grass, if it's there, that's great. If not, hay or chopped forage, some kind of sweet feed or pelleted feed, oats, barley, corn also perk the appetite. Horses like straight oats. Beet pulp is a good way to get fiber into them. Wheat bran, carrots, apples, other things like watermelon or granola bars, bananas, like whatever, it will perk the appetite. And again, the neighbor's feed, anything the horse will eat. There also is some controversy about whether to feed fat during a ride. The one thing that I can say is that some of the research has shown that fat in the diets does tend to slow gastric emptying. But what I think we find with the endurance horse is if their diet, their normal daily diet, has high fat, then their digestive system is well adapted to normal emptying, and there's no reason to change. They can use that fat while they're working, although it is a slower energy pathway. The one thing I would advise against is to not introduce fat for the first time on the day of the ride and think that he's going to have all this extra calories. That would be pretty detrimental to the horse. And one thing that we do see when they do get picky during a competition, they may go off their higher fat feed. And so you just need to have something else that's lower in fat available if that happens so that you can offer it to them. Then, so after the competition, like immediately after the competition, there's a very narrow window to rebuild those glycogen stores. And so this is when you want to make sure they get a starchy meal. The one thing that this is really important for is if you're doing a multi-day ride, because you need to kind of top up those glycogen stores before they go out the next day. So that's one little thing. But in general, after they finish the competition, you're going to give them some time off. And you may realize that these horses start really losing a lot of weight. I mean, it just starts falling off of them in the week after they've competed because their metabolisms are in high gear. So for that period of maybe a couple days or a week, you may want to feed them more than they normally get and feed them more frequently. And it usually, almost most of the time, it does not cause these horses to tie up. So with that, I would like to thank you for your attention.